School is your job. You might sit there and think, I hate school. And my teacher, I don't like my teacher. The teacher's unfair. I don't like homework. But in many ways, what we talk about here apply the same way, that you have a person who is an authority telling you what to do, and you have a job to do each day in the way that you do your homework and how you behave in school. And so that's your workplace. For those without work, it's you and EDD, maybe. I mean, the responsibilities that you have. And how do I go about seeking a job? I mean, it's any relationship, if you will, where you're working, waitresses with a customer, and so on, that take place. All of these are working conditions where we really raise the question, what is said here is, how do we as Christians be Christ-centered in the way that we behave in those ways? So let's take a look at this, see what God says, and then kind of dig this out a little bit. Ephesians 6, starting in verse 5. Again, Paul is in Ephesians 4 and 5. He talks about what it's like to be a Christian. He applied it to marriage. He applied it to parenting. And now he says, verse 5, slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but like slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly, as if you are serving the Lord, not men, because you know that the Lord will reward everyone for whatever good he does, whether he is slave or free. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. So the question is, what does it look like to be Christ-centered in the workplace, in our work and what we do? Well, first of all, when we look at this as Christians, then it's this understanding of that we have one employer, and that's Jesus Christ. I might work somewhere when I was in real estate, and of course, it's easier to think about when I'm a pastor. Oh yeah, Jesus Christ. But when I was in real estate, I still had one employer. It was Jesus Christ. Ephesians 6, he says that when we act, he says, we are slaves of Christ. He says, oh, don't worry about when they're looking at you or not. He says, but like being slaves of Christ is what he says. Now there's a parallel verse in Colossians. It's in your insert. I won't read through it, but it shows you that in the Colossian church, he wrote the same thing there. And in that particular one, in verse 24, he says that it's the Lord Christ you are serving when he talks about how you should work. What's interesting is the word in Colossians, Lord Christ. That's the only word in the Bible that says Lord Christ, and it doesn't say Jesus. The reasoning behind it, they said, is if you took the translation and actually laid it out in a sentence the way the Greek was, what it would really say, it is that serve the one master, or they said one true master, Christ. Lord being master, master Christ. And so what Paul was really saying to everybody here is that, look, don't worry about how behave in a way that how your employer is treating you, or how your master is treating you. He says, but serve the one true master, Christ. That's your master. And he sent that message to both in our case, the employer and the employee. It's that we are all slaves in Christ. I debated about saying it differently, but really, you think about it, Paul meant to say it that way. Because it's easy for us to say, oh, we're employees of Christ. That sounds safe. That sounds like, okay, yeah, we're working 8 hours a day or whatever. But for Paul to say, no. You are slaves in Christ. That means something totally different. Because for a slave, there was only one purpose for them to live, and that was to please the master, to do the will of the master. When they got up in the morning, when they went to bed at night, that was the only agenda of the day. What do I need to do to please the master? So for Paul to say to us, we are slaves in Christ, is to suggest to us that there is only one thing that we are to do, and to live and to act, even in the workplace, is to act in a way that pleases our master, our God in heaven. And so then we look in our work and we realize that we see every task as being a responsibility that God gives us, because now our workplace, we understand it differently. We see that, okay, if I'm serving God and He is the one who's my master and He's the one who's leading me, then in my workplace, I have to be able to consider the fact that this is my responsibility that my master in heaven has given me. This is the job that God has given me to do. This is the task that God has given me. So then, in thinking that, then, you realize there is no task beneath us. I remember working for a farmer just out of high school, and in the almond orchards, whatever you want to call them. And I remember it was always hard getting workers. They could get high school students, or they got, migrants. But you'd go to a typical American, they'd say, no, there's not enough money in it. That's beneath me. That's a complaint we often hear today. We think that, okay, well, I'm worth more. I'm not going to do that. I'm worth more. That's not the mindset of a Christ-centered worker, because Christ-centered workers, look, if God has called me to this, then this is the task that I'm called to do. And therefore, it's the greatest responsibility that God has given me. If God calls me to say, Mark, I want you to clean toilets. I was a janitor at the Christian school for years. Believe me, I cleaned up a lot of toilets and a lot of stuff on the ground that you kids, when you're sick, do. And it's easy to say, man, this is not for me. Let the teacher clean it up. Right? Teachers should do it. No. This is what God has called me to do. This is the responsibility that He has given me. And therefore, I have to be able to go at it with that sense of that responsibility. But the other thing then, when we see this as employers, Christ is our employer, then we also consider the fact of what he's saying in here is that we treat others the way we would treat Christ. When he's talking about how you would treat your employer or your employee or your slave and your owner, he's saying you act in a way that you would act to Christ. This goes beyond the golden rule. You know the golden rule. Kids, do you know the golden rule? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Have you ever heard that? Has your parents told you guys that yet? Yeah. We'll use it a lot of times. This goes beyond that, because it's not that. This rule, then what really is said here is to do unto others as you would do to Christ. When you get up in the morning and you go to work, when you go to school and you're sitting there in the classroom and your teacher's talking, you would behave in a way to your teacher, to your classmates, as if you were standing there doing it right in front of Jesus Christ to him. That's what that's saying, is if Christ is our employer, then how I treat my employer, how I treat my coworkers, how I treat people, my customers, how I treat my employees, is as if I was doing it to Jesus Christ himself. My vendors and all those people, anybody in that relationship. That's the mindset of Christ-centered. Imagine how that would impact you in the way you treat people, employees, employers, and vendors, and all those people, if you were thinking that that's Jesus Christ on the other line. I was talking, I won't go there, AT&T the other day. And boy, that voicemail system. By the time you get to someone, it's like you're ready to lay into them. I didn't, because she was a very nice person. But you think about that. We went to a movie the other night, last night. And just as a heads up, if you ever go to the Brendan Theater in Modesto, there's the Red Lion parking lot garage, and then there's I didn't know it, a Brendan Theater garage. And so you get free parking if you go to the movie. So I stamped it. I went up there, and the lady says, I'm sorry, sir, but we're not part of the Brendan Theater, so you have to pay the $3. My wife, in her grace, said, it's not her fault, Mark. And we were very nice. I was nice, but she knew I was not happy. I didn't say anything to her. I said, well, where's the sign? I think was what I said. Where's the sign that tells you that? Well, she points here, and I said, well, you can't see that going in. And then it's like, oh, you know what? It's okay, whatever. But in honesty, it's as if, in my mind, I should say, if that was Jesus Christ saying, hey, I'm sorry, Mark, but, Brendan Theater parking lot's over there. You should have thought about that before you parked here, my son. How would I treat him? What? Is that in your book somewhere? Did you write that down? Am I missing this? It's that mindset that we are employees of Jesus Christ, and that's the way that we treat people, and that's the way we look at it, and how we speak and how we talk. And imagine how that changes when we understand things in that way. The other thing about being Christ-centered then is that every job is an opportunity to worship. Work no longer becomes work. Work becomes worship.